What's going on, everybody? It's your boy C-Zar, and in this video we are talking about the GPCC Outlook event where Jerome Powell is interviewed and discussing the course of actions that may or may not need to take place going forward for the economy in reference to the economy. It's really just where they talk about various things going on with the American economy, inflation, jobs reports, all kinds of other things. But mainly those two things are what we're gonna talk about in this video. There's some things that he said that I want to go over, and there are some things that he said that I'll play as far as like clips go. We're gonna play a couple, or maybe more than a couple little things, and I'm gonna give my input on that. If that sounds good to you, hit the like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. What I will say right off the bat is that it seems as though, at least in my opinion, it seems as though where prior to this and for predominantly from like May and onwards, I was expecting that we'd get rate cuts in September and then a rate cut in November and a rate cut in December. It seemed as though September was the beginning of more rate cuts to come. This meeting makes it sound dicey, as if the Fed is saying they don't know whether they are going to cut rates at the next meeting or not. And of course, they always wait. They give some kind of forecasting and transparency as far as what to expect. But this meeting here, whereas before it seemed as though they were anticipating more cuts to come, it seems as though they're kind of taking that off the table. Not completely off the table, but saying, hey, we might not cut rates. It depends on a couple of things here, right? They discuss a dance of two issues that are coming up kind of conflicting with each other, which is that jobs reports are diminishing, right? That we are getting more unemployment, higher unemployment, and that there's also higher rates of inflation as well. So in order to stimulate the economy, what the Federal Reserve will normally do is they will decrease interest rates, and that tends to bolster the economy a little bit. But if interest rates are coming up at a concerning rate, which they've been working really hard over the past few years, more than a few years since COVID, really, to get those interest rates back down, they're just kind of weighing. And Jerome Powell even says it in this interview. He says there's no risk-free path ahead. So either they're going to have to sacrifice jobs whenever it comes to the economy, or they're going to have to sacrifice low inflation whenever it comes to the economy. So it depends on what they're willing to stimulate here. Are they going to stimulate the jobs market, or are they going to continue to tighten / maintain a tight policy where they're not cutting rates, at least not in a short amount of time, not at a fast rate? That way inflation can come down and they can have it under control. I want to play a clip here just to show what I'm talking about here, what Jerome Powell says here. So I'm going to mute myself and then we'll
Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up on balance over the course of this year on news about tariffs. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term inflation expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. The overall economic effects of the significant changes in trade, immigration, fiscal, and regulatory policy remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the tariff-related effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived, a one-time shift in the price level.
So you heard him say it there, right? That it seems, at least in my opinion, that he's not really concerned about the interest rates. While they're not at their goal is to get to 2%. I think he's starting to say here that, hey, we're okay without that for now, right? We got to stimulate the economy. We got to stimulate the jobs markets. We're going to decrease interest rates so that it's a more risk-on environment for people. Businesses feel free to take out loans and maybe expand and grow. They don't have to wait to expand out to their next ventures, stuff like that. We might stimulate the economy that way. That might be more beneficial than trying to bring the interest rates down to 2%, because the major concern that Jerome Powell and the Fed has had throughout this whole year of 2025 really has been the tariffs and the negative impacts that they would have. You hear him later in this say that he admittedly that they were worried about the rates what the tariffs would do to the rates of inflation, and they were worried about it more than what the reality actually called for, essentially saying that in reality these tariffs didn't affect inflation as bad as they thought. They are expecting, and what he's saying there, what he just said in that most recent clip I just played, he is saying that they are anticipating that this will impact the price of goods. There will be a one-time impact, but it'll probably happen over the coming months. And so over the coming months, not all at once, not this dramatic kind of shift, but slowly and going into next year, he even says. So my thoughts are with what he's saying here, is if the rate of inflation does grow if we do get CPI, PPI data, whatever else the other one is, all these inflation readings, if they come out a little bit higher over this next month than the last month, I don't think that's going to impact the Fed's decision negatively as far as cutting rates or not. I still think they will cut rates. But if inflation comes up, if the data actually comes out far more negative in the sense of growth, if we have more inflation, then we probably don't get rate cuts. Okay, so it depends on what extent this inflation is growing by. And he's saying that he's not expecting it to grow by much. If we get a deduction in inflation, if inflation is getting more under control next month, if the data comes out good, we are absolutely getting rate cuts. There's no doubt about it. At that, there's another clip that I want to play here. I've got a couple more clips that I want to play. Let's play this one here. I'm gonna mute myself again.
We have two goals, as you mentioned, maximum employment and price stability, and they're equal goals under the law. So almost all the time, they work together. They complement one another. So, for example, when the economy is weak, the unemployment rate might be high and the inflation rate would be low, and that it calls for stimulus from us. And when the economy is really strong and the labor market is tight, that's when inflation will be moving up, and so policy might be a little bit tighter. That's almost always the case. Right now is the quite unusual case where risks to, as I mentioned in my remarks, risks to employment are to the downside and to inflation to the upside. Now, we only have one tool, which is monetary policy, really interest rates, and really it's calling for different answers. So for a long time, we have a document called the Statement on Longer Run Goals and Monetary Policy Strategy. We call it the consensus statement to save time. That says, for a long time, it said that when the two goals are in tension, we'll look at how far each one is from its goal and the time that it's expected to take to get back to that goal. And so we balance the two goals. So what we've done all year this year is we've had our policy rate has been tight because inflation has been above our target, but the labor market was very solid. Now, over the last really 4 months, really over the summer, the labor market has softened. Payroll jobs have dropped a lot. So we can't really say that anymore. And I think what that told us is that stance of really having a tight focus on inflation really needs to moderate toward a more balanced approach. And so that's why we took the action we took at our last meeting. And as we go to our next meeting.
Okay, so you hear it there, right? He talks about how there's a kind of consensus. I forget what word it was, but what term he used to determine this. But there's like a playbook called the consensus something that he said in short earlier in that little clip that I played there. And what he's saying is that essentially when there are two things that normally flow together, like jobs and inflation, right? Normally if inflation is low, jobs are doing well, like these kind of go hand in hand together. But whenever they conflict with each other, the thing that he said there in his own words, in my interpretation of it, is that he's saying you basically have to choose the lesser of two evils. Like which one is the one that you're willing to sacrifice in order to bolster the other one. And in this, it sounds like he's saying they're willing to sacrifice. They're willing to put off. He even says in his own words, he says, which one is more suitable for longer term goals? Which one can you put off for the longer term, and which one needs addressing now? And in this, and throughout this whole interview, if you watch it, he talks about how interest rates getting to 2% are the long term goal. So he shows his hand there. He's very transparent, saying that interest rates, that they want to get to 2% as a long-term goal. But I think the more immediate goal right now is to take care of the jobs market. So with that, that's further confirmation that he's saying exactly what I was just saying a second ago, is that I believe at the cost of seeing higher rates of inflation, they are willing to cut interest rates more to bolster the jobs market and help bolster the economy in that sense. At the cost of having slightly increased rates of inflation, but only slight. They want to make sure they have it under control. They're okay with inflation coming up. They're okay with it, but it has to be controlled. If inflation gets out of control, we likely will not be cutting rates, and perhaps we'll even have to start tightening again. But you hear him say it throughout this whole thing, that they kind of have to choose which one here, and it seems as though they're more concerned with the jobs market, and it's not that concerning. He even says in another part of this video, he says that the jobs market's pretty balanced, right? Like firings and lack of hirings, like it's all pretty stable. It's just there's not new hirings coming on. There's not really new jobs being generated, and rates of unemployment have gone up a little bit, and that's not ideal. But overall, there's still this kind of balance. He even says there's a kind of balance in an odd way with the jobs market right now. So, but nonetheless, it seems as though that's his clear preference as far as which one he thinks has deserves more attention right now. I think he literally says it several times. If you watch this, and I watched it a couple times myself, he addresses that inflation can be put off. The rates of inflation, getting those underway. It's still a goal. It's a long-term goal, though. He says it plenty of times. We've got a couple more clips here, and then we're going to wrap this up, you guys. Okay?
One of your passions is demystifying the Fed. You enjoy speaking about it, and those that are Fed watchers are wondering, will there in fact be 2 additional rate cuts before the end of the year? Of course, we're uncertain about that, if I understood your comments correctly. What does it mean to demystify the Fed, and what can each of us in this room do to be better Fed watchers for the benefit of our own businesses, if you will?
So not so many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, and for a long time before that, the main theory of central banking was to be mysterious and obscure. In fact, Montague Norman, who's a very famous former head of the Bank of England, but ending in the middle of World War II, famously said, never apologize, never explain. And he thought that monetary policy worked back, and everyone thought it works best when no one understands. It's kind of mysterious. So starting maybe 40 years ago, a bunch of economists, including Alan Blinder and a number of others, said, you know what, that's wrong, because if markets and the public understand the way you'll react to incoming data, they'll kind of do your job for you. And so they argued for greater transparency. And people said, you know what, that makes sense. So central banks started being transparent. The Fed didn't even issue a post-Federal Open Market Committee.
So that part there is something that I've talked about a good bit as far as Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve goes, which is that they are transparent, right? And just going back to everything that we've talked about so far in this video, they're not trying to trick you. He says it there. He doesn't think that's actually good for the economy. They don't think it's good. He goes on to explain that the United States started doing this where they were more transparent, and there was no consensus around the world to start doing this, but people saw how well that went, and they started doing the same thing, because whenever you do have transparency with the markets, whenever they're aware of what kind of monetary policy you're trying to shift towards or what aim you're taking, that allows them to act appropriately. And again, as he says it word for word, that allows the markets to kind of do the Fed's job for them, the central bank's job for them. They're not trying to trick people. They're not trying to play this game of jargon or language that the common folk doesn't understand. They try to be transparent, and they talk in their own way. There's some boring terminology, and it is kind of boring listening to all this stuff. But if you pay attention, and the reason why I'm making this video is to hopefully make it more easily understandable for the average person if you're watching this, because you might get a little bit more bored watching this guy talk than you get bored watching this guy talk, hopefully. And in which case, I'm just trying to identify the important parts, but they are transparent. And if you watch this, you can see exactly what I'm trying to say is that they're not trying to trick us here. They're trying to tell us that, hey, there's a couple of things that are concerning right now: jobs market and inflation. All right. There's no clear path ahead. He even says it in this video. There's no clear path ahead that's risk-free. There's no risk-free path. Something's going to give. But whenever it comes to this kind of dynamic, what do they choose? They choose the one that's more demanding, the one that's more, not severe, I don't want to say severe, but the one that demands more attention, which at this point, it seems to me, they are saying, and consistently Jerome Powell says that inflation getting to 2% is a long-term goal. Long-term goal means not immediate, not right now. If they need to, and they are concerned with inflation, but they've been working on bringing down the rates of inflation now since 2022, guys. They've been doing it for a long time, and they were very hesitant. They took a long time in lowering these rates this year, and inflation, even with the tariffs, was not as bad as they thought it would be, and Jerome actually admits to that. So because of that, I think they're willing to kind of buffer this tightening on the interest rates. They're willing to loosen up on that, ease up on that a little bit, take a more neutral stance, as he says, in order to help stimulate the economy a little bit. And I think with the continuation of these interest rates being cut, you will see jobs starting to come back. You will see businesses starting to expand and take on new ventures, take out loans, stuff like that, and not just businesses, but homes, different markets in the economy as well. There's one more thing I want to play. I hope you guys are having a good time with this so far. I am. Let's see. We're gonna play this last part.
Struck me just now about the Fed, and that is, remember, we have a really important job: maximum employment, price stability. We regulate and supervise the banks. We operate parts of the payment system, but those things are really about cyclical demand management and financial stability. The policies that really matter for the U.S. economy in the long run, things like investment, particularly investment in people, That's not something we can do. I think we get a disproportionate amount of attention compared to the things that really matter for the country, which are the things that Congress can do and the private sector can do, which are the things that will really matter for future generations, are not interest rate policy and the things that we do as important as we are. And beyond that, I'll say this has been great, as always. I've enjoyed.
Okay, guys. So I don't know if you picked that up, but I think, again, talking about transparency, Jerome Powell's a smart man. You might not like him because Donald Trump doesn't like him, whatever. I don't care what your stance is. He's a smart man, and he is transparent. And I think he's actually the perfect man for the job as far as Fed chairman goes. I really think. I don't think I'm the only person that thinks this. I think he has a lot of respect in the economic world, in the markets and everything. There's some people who are talking crap about him because they like Donald Trump, and Donald Trump likes to talk smack. But I think even Trump knows that Jerome Powell is good for our economy. He's doing a good job. And what he says there, because the question that was prompted by this is, what would you tell Fed listeners, people like you and me, who are watching this video, who are trying to decipher what he's saying, but it's not really deciphering, right? He says right there that he gets too much attention. The Fed gets too much attention. All they can do is increase or decrease interest rates. That's it. That's their big thing. Other than that, they're just market analysts. Their big thing is monetary policy. That's the only tool they have. He says if you want to understand the outlook better, if you want the important stuff, he talks about pay attention to what's happening in Congress and in the private sector. And I think the fact that he said this today might mean that there are. I think that he's not foreshadowing, maybe foreshadowing, hinting that there are things to pay attention to as far as economic developments go in the private sector and through Congress over the coming days, weeks, and months, probably by the end of the year. There are things, if you want to understand the directional heading of the economy, he's saying, don't pay attention to me, pay attention to Congress. He says Congress first and the private sector. So that's something that I think we could all do better with, right? Congress, man, if you think Jerome Powell is boring or hearing him talk, hearing the Federal Reserve is boring, you should listen to these Congress meetings, man. They use all kinds of jargon that are outside of my realms of understanding at times, not always. It's still understandable. Sometimes you have to play it back, but I'm just saying I feel like listening to these congressional hearings or congressional meetings whenever they're trying to pass things, it's a lot more boring than this stuff. And that's why it's harder to listen to. But that might be something that we do going forward. We might have to pay attention to things that are going on, bills that are being passed in Congress that might likely do impact the economy. So just some key tips from Jerome Powell himself to the Fed watchers, which at this point, if you're watching this video, you're a Fed watcher. You got to be. I got nothing else for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. The general perspective that I received, that I hope you received too, if it seems clear to you, if you watch this whole video of me or you watch the whole video from Jerome Powell, it seems as though they're uncertain. They're not completely convinced like they were before that they are going to continue to cut rates, but they seem to be leaning that way, right? As long as interest rates are not out of hand, just completely rambunctious, as long as they're somewhat tame, even if they're increasing, I think they're willing to sacrifice that. They're seeing that the interest rates slip away from them a little bit because they have the long-term goal of bringing it down to 2%. I think they're okay with sacrificing that a little bit in order to help stimulate the economy in other areas. Okay, so it seems to me, at least throughout all this, where at first what I heard was uncertainty, as the video progressed, as the interview progressed, it seems as though he didn't say it, but I very much do believe that they are going to cut interest rates on the next two FOMC meetings. As long as inflation rates don't get wild. As long as inflation rates don't get wild. Anyways, I got nothing else for you guys. Hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you on the next one, okay? Take care of yourselves. Bye.